Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's Sanderson Farms Championship. Hopefully everyone's enjoying the start to the NFL year, but we've got some golf business to attend to this week, and we're back to that main slate action. So gonna break down this golf tournament for you guys, take a look at the weather first off, then the DFS and prop side to give you guys some last minute notes to go out there, finalize your exposure, go over any questions that you may have. Just get ready to go out there and have ourselves a week. So hopefully you guys are having a fantastic Wednesday, whether you're already down there in the live chat. I see we have a couple comments down there already, or if you're watching this on replay, hopefully you're having a fantastic night and are ready to get after it. What's going on, Mark? Hopefully you're having a fantastic evening. What's going on? Steven as well says, howdy y'all, let's have some fun. Amen to that. So we're going to start it off with a look at the weather forecast, which for the first few days is not going to impact my process all that much. So let's take a look at it day by day, but pretty much however we splice this up, I don't see a massive edge to be had. But out here for Thursday, you see that there's relatively low winds the entire day. It is going to be a little bit cooler in the morning than you see throughout the rest of the day, but it's not going to be 40, 50 degrees out there in the morning, where it should make a huge difference on conditions. So whether it's the wind perspective, looks pretty consistent out there for round number one. And then in terms of your, humidity and all of that, it also looks pretty flat throughout the rest of the day. So, normally at a golf course, it plays a little bit easier in the morning as conditions tend to be a little bit more receptive. But, that's a 0.25 shot difference. And then if we take a look at Friday, I think it's going to even out there as well. So we'll use the NAM forecast out there for our Friday forecast. And what you'll see over here is that in the morning, you've got slightly better conditions. In the afternoon, it does ramp up a little bit, but it's literally a 2-mile-an-hour difference. So I think whatever sort of quote unquote edge your players are going to get tomorrow is likely going to get taken away there on Friday afternoon. So I think if I was going to play any sort of edge, maybe I would go PM AM, just because we know tomorrow afternoon is likely going to be a pretty calm day. We know that with the HRRR, but if we take a look at some of the other models on here, NEM has it pretty calm tomorrow afternoon. Medio Blue, really whichever one we were to take a look at here, is going to show us tomorrow's pretty ideal. So I think if you were going to play a weather edge, if you were going to force one in, which it's not really my favorite idea on a week like this, but if you were going to force anything, I would go PMAM. I've heard a few people say they prefer that wave to begin with, just players that can continue that momentum from round one into round two. But when you add on the fact that we know tomorrow is going to be calm, who knows what happens on Friday? Maybe that forecast gets a little bit windy, a little bit more blustery out there in the afternoon. We've seen crazier things happen out there with the weather forecast. So that's what I'll say about it. Don't want to talk too much about it because it doesn't look like it's going to be a massive difference out there for days 1 and 2. What we do want to talk about extensively is going to be the DFS side. So let me bring up our projections. We'll talk through some ownership heading into lock here. And we've got the ownership out there for the players that are 9K plus. So we'll talk through some of the game theory towards the top end of the board. But on a week where people are going to be a little bit lazier, they're not going to put in maybe as much time as they typically do out there on their process. It's one where you're going to see a lot of lazy ownership. You're going to see a lot of the guys with quote unquote good recent form. And I'll put that in quotes because we'll talk about that here in a second. A lot higher owned than the other players around them. And the issue with using recent form in quotes as something they use this week is that it's not all that recent. Most of these players didn't make the playoffs. Most of them are getting shots gain metrics from back at the Wyndham Championship or 3M Open, maybe the Pro Core out here this fall, but there's no sample size to work off of. And if we know that a lot of the casuals out there, the people that aren't going to put in their research, are going to go out there and just play the good quote unquote recent form players, then it makes for a massive edge on a week like this. So while we don't have a huge weather edge to go and lean into, I do think from the game theory angle that this week is as good as it's going to get when it comes to PGA DFS. So if you've got some higher owned players that you were considering playing or not, trying to figure out whether to include them or exclude them from your player pool, try and fade as much chalk as humanly possible this week. Golf is already a very hard to predict sport. But when you add on top of that all of these, uneducated golf bettors are just going to be playing guys because they've been quote unquote playing well. It's an absolute joke if you're going out there and doing that. So, maybe you could say Mackenzie Hughes looked pretty good at the President's Cup. I think that would be a fair take. But if you're looking at stats from I think a perfect example here would be like a Ben Griffin, or if you're looking at stats from guys like a Steven Yeager and trying to use them to, model your process, you're full of shit, right? Steven Jaeger had all these playoff events against the best fields in golf. You're comparing them to some of these other players that didn't even make the playoffs, that were playing in slapdick fields to end last season. So don't fall into that trap. If you're a big model guy in a week like this, I'd give you a little bit of pushback, right? It's not the best week to go out there and marry yourself to the numbers. And if you can move on from that, move on from some of the super chalky plays, I think it's really a week to take advantage. So let's catch up on chat, see what's going on. We got Anthony who has a question about Grillo and Taylor Moore. Both have pretty good course history and maybe flying a little bit under the radar. So I would say I agree with you there, Anthony. I think both are decent options this week. I was a little bit higher out there on Taylor Moore myself, as he is in my player pool. I like the Bermuda grass putting. I like long players at this kind of golf course. It's a sneaky long golf course when you take a look at the scorecard yardage. Par fives aren't really reachable in 2 unless you're a bomber. So I like Taylor Moore for that reason. A lot of it comes down to agronomy as well. This can turn into a little bit of a putting contest when it is relatively calm, and first 2 days look calm as can be. So if it's going to be a putting contest, I want Taylor Moore. He's one of the better putters that we have out there. And he fits a few of the other things I'm looking for too. Emiliano Grillo, I don't know if he's a great course fit like I'd have for Taylor Moore, but Grillo's a baller. He's a better player than most people in this field. He hasn't had his best form the last few months, but we've had a month break. Maybe he figured something out. He's somebody who's won on tour the last few years. Down in that price range, not many guys can say that. So I would say guys like Grillo, Steven Jaeger is my poster child for this week. I don't really care how he's played in terms of his recent form. I know Steven Jaeger's a winner. I know he's a baller out there. And if he's going to be lower owned than some of these slapdicks around him, then, give me all the Steven Jaeger this week. So I think you're on to 2 really solid options there, Anthony. And you got my cosign on both of them. What's going on? Nick says, good evening, Luke. Hope I'm having a great day. I am. And yeah, it's a great time of year. We got golf and football going on. It's busy, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Let's keep moving on through this board here. So what I want to do up top is just talk through the ownership. So as I said before, we do have ownership for everyone that's $9,000 plus. Up top, I think it's a good week to play the ownership game, especially when we've got like a Keith Mitchell at 25% ownership. And sure, he's maybe the most quote unquote consistent player that we have in this field, but he shouldn't be $10,400 pretty much at any field out there on the PGA Tour. And the fact that he's 25% owned isn't so much that I think people love Keith Mitchell. It's that people are going to go out there and try and spend all their salary. So you've got guys here like Seamus Power. He's actually been pretty good on the DP World Tour, so I can't talk too much crap about his form there. But even like Mackenzie Hughes, a JJ Spawn, a McNeely here at $9,800, if there wasn't that salary component, if people weren't trying to spend all of their salary in their lineups, I think that all of these guys would be at least 5% lower owned, if not closer to like 10% lower owned. They're not all the best plays for this kind of week. And I think if you compare these 9K options to everyone that's 10K plus, they're essentially the same sort of player. So I thought early in the week that this 9K range might be a lot higher owned. And what you've seen actually is the opposite, that 10K range is still carrying that ownership because pricing is soft enough to where you need to take 10K guys to go out there and actually spend all your salary. So what I'm doing this week, I'll just tell you just from a general process standpoint, I know a lot of it's blacked out towards the top end of the board, but I'm fading almost all of that 10K range. In fact, I can't give you guys the exact exposure because it would tip my hand a little bit too much for what I'm doing. But those guys that are 10K plus, I think are overowned in almost every single case, especially somebody like a Keith Mitchell that's nearly 25% owned. So nothing I can say really negative about any of their games. Like there's a reason they're the 5 most expensive players, but Keith Mitchell, a shaky putter at a birdie fest, that's a little sketchy, right? Seamus Power, his form's been on the DP World Tour, so you got to wonder how that's going to translate the PGA Tour fields that are a little bit stronger. Mackenzie Hughes just had the huge letdown at the President's Cup. Got to wonder if he's a little bit emotionally drained. Like you could think of reasons to fade these guys, right? So maybe I've tipped my hand a little bit there with what I'm doing up top, but in general, I think the ownership up top is definitely something to keep an eye on. Nick Dunlop, the chalkiest player that I'm taking in my player pool up here. I actually thought that Dunlop might be like 25% owned, but because the form is just sketchy enough, right? He's only about neutral with his shots gained metrics recently. That's got him at about 20% in my projections. So down here in the 9K range, Fishburne's about 21%. it's really spread out for the most part. You've got about 18% on a Ben Griffin. That's, about average out here for this range. Eric Cole a little bit lower than average at 16.5% ownership. It's really not until you get into that top end of the 8K range or bottom end of the 9s where you start to see the ownership start to polarize a little bit more. Up top, it's pretty flat. Maybe Keith Mitchell is one of the exceptions, a JJ Spawn, a Patrick Fishburne. But when you start to get down here to this 8-9K range is where it really starts to spread out. You've got a few guys down here that are going to be sub 8% owned. And then you've got some real chalky pieces down here in the 8K range as well. So though the ownership is going to end here at the 9K range, of course, guys, if you want all my projections, all the ownership numbers, you know where to find it, right? Over there on the Patreon page in the description of the video. But that idea of trying to fade some of those overowned players is only going to be more so the case the further down the board that we get, right? Up top, I like a Dunlop at 20%. I'm going to splurge on a few guys when it comes to ownership. But when I get down to the 8-7, and especially down there in the 6K range, there's almost no chalky players that I'm using in my player pool. So just as I said before, you're going to get a lot of people being lazy with their ownership this week. Just exploit that. Know that it's going to be a thing. People are going to play guys that, good recent form, right? Coming from like 2.5 months ago, exploit that. Don't be that kind of fish that thinks the model is everything this week. You love Jaeger here too. You said you have two more that you were high on as well. So you got Lauer and Sam Stevens. I think that there's upside with those two, particularly Justin Lauer. I'd say he's my favorite out of those two, Anthony. What I like about Lauer is the putting. If you can't tell, I think it's going to be a little bit of a birdie fest this week. And he's a good putter on Bermuda. And he's also been hitting the ball a lot better recently than we've ever seen before the PGA Tour. He's been really sketchy with the shots gained approach. Even off the tee, he's not the best off the tee player, admittedly. But at this golf course, you can kind of fake it around off the tee. We've seen guys like Mackenzie Hughes win here. So there's other examples too of short, really inaccurate players that have gotten it done. So yeah, I've got some love for Justin Lauer. Sam Stevens, he's a real risky option. I'd say if you're playing in a large field GPP, he's the kind of guy I'd be more than willing to get to. Has the birdie or better upside, the length to take on the par fives. The issue with Sam Stevens is that he can't putt for his life. So if you get one of those negative putting weeks, he's losing 2-3 strokes to the field, he's not going to do anything for you. He's a little bit too expensive to get there with a negative putter. But if he can gain with the putter, which is kind of asking a lot for Sam Stevens, he could have a good week. So I'll say large field GPPs, if you're willing to take on that putter risk, he could get there. How do I feel about Mark Hubbard? I feel like he's a pretty good low-owned option. So it's a good segue here from the 9K range down to the 8s. But Mark Hubbard is one of the guys with horrible recent form, right? And again, recent form in quotes. I'm just going to keep reminding you guys, because if you're using this number over here where he's number 91 in the field in recent form ranking, you're a little bit of a donkey this week if you're going out there and doing that. So yeah, I like Mark Hubbard. He's a high birdie percentage player. He's I believe a top 5 player in the field when it comes to birdie or better percentage. In fact, he might even be like number 2 or number 1 in the field. Actually, sorry, he's not number 1. Number 1's Keith Mitchell. I know that for a fact, but he's up there in the top 5 when it comes to birdie or better percentage. And though the form recently has left a little bit to be desired, he also went out there Monday, qualified with a -7 for the Pro Tour, started really hot at that event as well with a lot of birdies. He's been playing better golf than I think most people would give him credit for. And what I like about the course fit here, he's not the best off the tee player. Kind of reminds me of a Mackenzie Hughes, except that his real strength maybe isn't the putter. It's his approach play. He's one of the best iron players that you're going to get in this field. Mackenzie Hughes, of course, right? His Excalibur is going to be that flat stick going out there and making putts. The similarity is that they're dog shit off the tee. Mark Hubbard's at least accurate. He just doesn't hit the ball very far. I hit the ball about as far as Mark Hubbard does, so which is not very impressive in terms of off the tee. But he's live at this kind of event, man. You give him a golf course where it's not all about the off the tee play, and a guy like Mark Hubbard could win. I don't think he's very live to win this week. I wouldn't count on it. I didn't bet him or anything, but he's at least got that in his range of outcomes. That's for sure. And so was that it for questions? Of course, Anthony. Does Keith Mitchell being the highest priced golfer and having missed the cut here concern me? Yes. I'm fading him. I'll just flat out say it. I'm not using him in anything this week. He's the highest owned player in my projections as well. And on a week where all these guys are slappies up top, you really have no confidence in anyone in this field, let alone even these 9-10K guys that you're paying an arm and a leg to use in lineups. Yeah, it concerns me a lot. In fact, Almost the entire top end of the board really concerns me. In fact, I can't give you guys like where I'm starting my player pool, but you can probably tell that those top, 3 or 4 guys probably aren't in my lineups. I don't want to say it outright, but you can probably tell. Any thoughts on Ben Griffin? Good form here last year, finished second, was the leader for most of Sunday before collapsing at the end. He's kind of reminds me of Mackenzie Hughes, shorter, not really a good off the tee player, but can fake it around a country club of Jackson. He's like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 6.5 out of 10 for me. The issue is that he's also getting some ownership. So, if you love him, you like the course history, then lean into it. The one thing I'll say, let's go over here to the course history tab. If you take a look at some of the winners, like Mackenzie Hughes went cut last year after winning. You go down to Luke List, for example, like his track record's all over the place. Win, hardly made the cut. 17th, pretty good. Missed cut. The only real guys that have been consistent, I guess it's notable, Henrik Norlander has been eerily consistent at this golf course, and then also CT Pan. And coincidentally, they're at the same price tag this week. But your winners, your guys that have played really well here, have not had that kind of consistency. So that's what I would say about it out there with Ben Griffin, is just because he played well here last year doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen again. It's been one of those wild course history courses. So that's why I'm not overly enthralled with him. I don't hate the play. He's a really good Bermuda grass putter. That's huge for this kind of event. He's been hitting the ball really well recently, but the course history thing is, I think, just it's got that ownership at a point where it's a little uncomfortable. Like, I prefer Nick Dunlap over Ben Griffin, and that's personally where I would side with my exposure. You came late. Sorry. Any love for Power, and better late than never, Timothy. So welcome on in, man. And for Power, really good form on the DP World Tour. So I would say I'm not a massive fan, maybe a 6.5 out of 10 on a Seamus Power. The issue is kind of the ownership side too, right? He's 18% out there in my projections, which is far from low. That's for sure. Thoughts on Michael Thorbjornsen? So he's actually one of my value plays this week. So I love Michael Thorbjornsen. I like the birdie upside. John Deere Classic, I think, is a relatively comparable course, and he's going to be low owned. I've got him at about 6.6% projected ownership, which is far from chalky in this range. He's a little bit higher owned than the average, but he's not overly chalky there at $7,200. So if you want to see my full take on it, I do give like a whole 5-minute breakdown on my DFS preview. But the Spark Notes version is that he's good on par fives. He's a good birdie or better percentage player, despite not having the best shots gained heading in. And the only category that he's losing in is off the tee. And he's an incredible off the tee player. So a lot of that has just been massive mistakes, water balls, OB balls, that sort of thing for Thor. And if he can clean that up, and again, this course, I've said it a few times already, but it's wide open off the tee. You don't have to be as worried about guys spraying it here. That's huge for him. If that's been his only issue, his Achilles heel to this point of the year, then this could really be a good spot for him. So that's why I like him, and that's why I bet him this week too. I took him for, you can see the top 10 there at plus 825, but I also added a first round leader bet too. How's it going? Do I think there's going to be an edge, you're saying, if you're going off holes 1 or 10? Not a huge edge. I'd say in Showdown, maybe you could look into it, try and find an edge there, but not off the top of my head, man. Not that I know. Thoughts on Novak Nation? So yeah, Novak Nation, I've played golf with Andrew before, so I don't want to say that we're friends or anything, but certainly acquaintances. He's played down here in South Florida for a few different, boarding schools, I guess, down here in South Florida. I think he's an okay option. The issue I have with him is the putting numbers. So the ball striking stats have been pretty solid, but when you get him on Bermuda grass, it's kind of surprising because he's played down here in South Florida, right? That he'd be bad on Bermuda, but he's nearly a stroke worse per round on Bermuda grass. So that's the issue for me. I don't know if I hate him this week, though, because he's a damn good ball striker. So I would say if you're playing like single entries or cash, I'd like him a whole lot more. The kind of format where you maybe don't need the nuts to go out there and take it down, because he's got like top 30, top 20 written all over him. And if you're in that kind of format, that's gold, right? That's kind of what you want from a 7K player. So I think there's a time and place for him. Maybe not my favorite GPP play, though. And the reason why I say that is the putting numbers at a birdie fest like this, you've got to make putts. So if you're going to be the nuts, you're going to finish top 3, top 5, you're going to have to make some of those. All right, let's keep this thing going. So we've mentioned Mark Hubbard here a little bit, but let's move down here to Taylor Moore. So I know we had a question about him a little bit earlier, but he's actually one of the plays I wanted to add onto the sheet here because he fits this golf course so well. He's an extremely stout off the tee player, very solid par 5 scorer, one of the longest players that we have in this field, and he's a decent Bermuda grass putter. So these stats over here, I would say, would be a little bit misleading because all of his win and all of his top 5, top 10 finishes have come on Bermuda grass. So despite the numbers being about neutral out here on the surface, Taylor Moore's had almost all of his ceiling rounds and spike performances on courses that are like Country Club of Jackson. So the event history too, I know somebody mentioned that before. It's been okay. Top 25 and then also top 20 there 3 years ago. Last year did not play this event, and he's gotten a lot better since we saw him there 2 and 3 years ago. So I would say he's a much more consistent player now. He's shown a lot more upside over the last season or so. So I like him quite a bit out here at this kind of event. Down here in the 7K range, I guess to point out some of the chalk, Norlander and CT Pan, because of their course history, are a little bit popular. I did mention that they were one of the few players that have been consistent at this golf course, but I wouldn't get suckered into that too much. If you don't love the course fit, you don't like some of the numbers, you're modeling out there for this week on either option, I would be totally fine with fading either player because I already showed you guys the track record of guys that have won here, right? Cut, finished in first, and then finished in T35, which doesn't mean much for Mackenzie Hughes. I wouldn't be too enthralled with some of these chalky guys at $7,500. A few other chalky players, let's see. So off the top of my head, I know we don't have the projections on here, so it's a little bit harder to find some of that chalk. Which, speaking of, I'll just bring it up on the another tab. So don't even have to guess. I can just give you guys the highest owned players, and I'll give you some of their ownerships as well. Let's see. So we're going to go from $7,900 and below. So Rico Hoey, I guess he's at $8,000, so I guess that doesn't count. But he's like 12% owned. Let's see. Norlander's over 10%. CT Pan's over 8% owned. I've got Jacob Bridgman getting some exposure as well. Who else? Goddard up at 7.4%. I guess that's not unsubstantial ownership. That's nothing crazy. They're at like 7%. Outside of those few players, it's a lot of 2 and 3%ers that I'm seeing in my projections. Maybe 5-6%ers on guys like a Luke List, champion last year. He's about 6% owned. There's no one that's that outrageously chalky. I would just say that those guys, Ryan Fox is like 8% owned. I'll point that out. Grillo, I've got it about 8% ownership. Andrew Novak's about 9% owned himself. Your entire player pool shouldn't be all those guys that are like 8-9% owned, but you can mix in a few of them. And I do want to note that Andrew Novak, by the way, I'm playing him this week. He is in my player pool, but I like him a little bit more in those single entries. So just wanted to circle back on that. He is out there as a yes on my sheet, but maybe more of like a single entry thing. Anything else for ownership? Let me look at the 6K range real quick before we go back to the other spreadsheet. Yeah, 6K range, Parker Cootie's like 2.5% owned. A Blaine Hale, he's only $6,100. He's a little bit over 1.4% ownership. Those kind of guys, they're higher owned than their peers, but 2.5% ownership isn't outrageous chalk down low. So while you do want to play the game theory angle, I don't think you have to galaxy brain it at all 6 spots. You have 1-2 players that you can get at sub 5, sub 6% ownership. You're going to be totally fine out there in your lineup. So let's get back to this other sheet over here. Let's catch up on any questions and get through the rest of these plays. Of course, Illini, sorry. Tongue twister there for me, my bad. Any love for Vegas? So the only concern I have with Vegas, in terms of love, yeah, he's like a 7 out of 10 for me. I like the fact that he looks like the old Johnny Vegas, hitting the ball a long way. Irons have been on point the last 3-4 months. The issue, and it's a big issue when it comes to Vegas, is the ownership. So I know on here I have him blacked out when it comes to the ownership number, but he's getting close to that 20% mark. So he's definitely a little bit higher owned than you'd probably like. So if you're in a format where you can afford to take that ownership, I think he's a fantastic play. But if you're playing in the large field GPP, I like a few other guys just a little bit more. So that's what I'll say about Vegas is definitely a solid play. With how he's hitting it, he's just a better play than a lot of the other guys in this range. But it has been a few weeks since we've seen him. So who knows if he's still hitting the ball the same way. And that's the issue with some of the chalk this week, guys, is that even if they had good form like to end the year, and even if it was in the playoffs, like there are a few guys that played well in the playoffs that are in this field, there's been 2-3 weeks off. And I know as a golfer myself that a week is a long time as a golfer in terms of your personal form. These guys are practicing day in, day out, most likely. A lot can change in just over half a month. So that's the concern, I guess, with Vegas, right? Is that he's chalky and we don't really know how he's hitting it right now, which is a little bit of a problem for me. Down here at the bottom end of the board, the last play I want to point out before we go out and build a lineup, talk some lineup construction, it's going to be Taylor Montgomery here at $6,700. And this just reeks of a Taylor Montgomery bounce back spot. When he first came out here on the PGA Tour, he was on fire a few years ago. And what you'll remember is at these fall series events, he printed. I mean, he went out there top 10 like literally every single week. And a lot of it's probably because they're not ball striking heavy events. The biggest strength of Taylor Montgomery, and it's a very obvious one, is his putter. He's probably the best putter on planet Earth. At this point, his stats are better than Denny McCarthy, so I know a lot of people still give him the crown in that department. For me, my money, it's Taylor Montgomery, and it isn't particularly close. His big issue with the ball striking, his irons aren't great. He's average at best when it comes to the iron play. His issue's off the tee. He cannot hit a fairway for his life. Just like Mackenzie Hughes won here, just like we've had a few other slappies, slap it around off the tee and win at this golf course. If Taylor Montgomery's ever going to win a tour event, it's at this kind of golf course. And he doesn't have to win to be optimal at $6,700. In fact, a top 10 is probably all you need at that kind of price tag. He's one of the higher birdie percentage players that we have in this field. So despite him making tons of bogeys, he's made, I believe, his top 30 in the field when it comes to birdie or better percentage. And then, I mean, bogey percentage through the roof. So he makes a lot of his mistakes. This isn't really that kind of golf course. This is a course where the length off the tee is nice. He hits the ball country mile. It's one of the best par 5 scores in the field. So I've been sitting on this play all week. I've been hoping that no one was going to use him. And at 2.7% ownership, he's average, if not below average ownership here towards the top end of the 6K range. So you can see over here that big dark green box, which is really why I want to play Montgomery this week. He gains a stroke per round putting out here on Bermuda grass. That's a stroke per round over an event. That is a cumulative 4 strokes that he's gaining to the field. With that length off the tee, that's likely going to be a positive for him this week. Around the green, he's a really good player. He's normally a big gainer around the green. I mean, if he's a neutral with the approach play, that's a big week for Taylor Montgomery. So I've got a lot of optimism for him. And down low, it's these kind of guys that I'm getting to. High upside birdie makers, whether it's par 5 scoring, whether it's that off the tee power, which is really helpful for the par 5s at this golf course. That's what I'm looking for in players, is upside, right? Not so much floor. Taylor Montgomery can miss the cut this week. If he plays bad enough off the tee, if you miss far enough on this golf course, you can really get into some trouble, but you've got to miss it off the planet. He can miss the cut. He could do that, right? That's well within his range of outcomes. But I more so care about down low is, can this guy top 10? And it's rather obvious that he could top 10 at this kind of event. So we've, what's the course history like? I do want to check in on that. Let's see. What has Taylor Montgomery done at this specific golf course? What is he, $6,700 here? So he didn't play here last year, but when he first came out on the PGA Tour, right, like I said, he was like top 10ing every single week. Top 10 here a few years ago. He does that same thing at this price tag, and you're going to have him out there in GPP. So hopefully it gives you guys an idea of how I'm approaching my process this week. It's not a lot of chalk that I'm playing. It's a lot of guys that are just long-term birdie makers for the most part, right? I want guys with firepower out of Birdie Fest. And if I can find some characteristics I'm looking for in terms of my modeling, then that's even better. But it's not one where you want to marry yourself to the modeling. It's why we didn't go through all of our key stats. Once again, a lot of that's just going to lead you in the wrong direction. We haven't seen players for over a month in a lot of cases. So if you're leaving, or I should say, if you're marrying yourself to the stats this week, you're probably not doing the right thing. Let's bring up Draftkings. Let's build a lineup together, talk through some of the lineup construction notes, and then we're going to talk through the prop side. So let me bring up Draftkings here, and then on Underdog and Prize Picks, I've got you guys with a bunch of props here in just a few minutes. So in terms of lineup construction, though, over here in the large field GPPs, if you're just playing that ownership game, I mean, with your player pool, so if your player pool is just going to be a lot, lower owned guys, then you're not going to really have to worry about your lineup construction when you're building lineups. If you're playing some donkey chalk, particularly down there in like that 7 to 8K range, then you might actually have to worry about going out there with your lineup. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to play a little bit more chalk than I probably will in practice. And this isn't going to be a lineup I'm entering, right? In fact, I'm going to be using guys that aren't in my player pool in this lineup just to make it perfectly obvious that this isn't something that I'm entering myself. What I'm more so going to show you is that if you're playing a lineup, right, what you should be thinking about when clicking players. These aren't going to be guys that I love. This isn't going to be a lineup, like I said, that I'm just going out there and hammering myself. The far more important aspect are what I'm considering, after I've taken 2-3 chalky players, right? What does that do to my thought process? So let's just start it off right at the bat. I'm going to throw Keith Mitchell in here. I'm not playing Keith this week, right? Again, full transparency there. He's about 25% owned, so I'm just going to try and give ourselves some chalk towards the top. Let's throw in Johnny Vegas into this kind of lineup, and I'm going to throw one more piece of chalk in here with a Mac Meissner at $8,000. So you've got 3 guys that are over 15%. We've got a 24, 25% owned Mitchell. We've got a Vegas at about 18% and a Meissner here at about 14.5% ownership himself. And though this is a pretty chalky start, this is way, way chalkier than what I'm going to go with up top. You could still make this kind of lineup work. The thing is, if you're going to start with this kind of build, you just have to have a game plan to go and mix it up down low. If your player pool in the 6 and 7K range are guys that are all like subs 5-6% ownership, then you're going to be totally fine to round off this kind of lineup. Will it be maybe a little bit chalkier than some of the other builds in the GPP? Sure, right? Because he went with 3 really chalky guys up top, but it's not a death sentence when it comes to putting together a lineup. So towards the top end of the 6K range, we're going to try and get a little different here and throw in a Justin Lauer, who's a little bit lower owned than some of the other guys around him. Towards this middle end of the 7K range, maybe rather than going Taylor Moore here, who's about 9% ownership, we try and force in a little bit of differentiation. So an option that you could use to do that might be, let me double check on the ownership actually. I believe Glover's like 6% owned, but I'm going to try and find the lowest owned option between him and Ryan Fox. So bear with me, but I double check my projections. See, I've got Ryan Fox at like 8%. So the lowest owned option there would be a Lucas Glover. This is where your hand is forced a little bit. You don't really get to play who you want down here in this range because of who you took up top. So that's why there's pros and cons to taking some chalk, right? Like if we had lower owned options up top, so like maybe rather than a Keith Mitchell, we went with, let's throw McNeely there rather than a Johnny Vegas. Let's go with Steven Yeager here at $9,000. If you started with McNeely Yeager, who's a little bit of a lower owned pairing than those other 2 players that we had in there, rather than having to go down here and play a Lucas Glover, you could take a little bit more chalk towards the top end of the 7K range. So whether that's a Taylor Moore or wanting to go up here to a Emiliano Grillo, for example, you can make this kind of lineup work at slightly higher ownership because of the decisions you made towards the top end of the board. So what I do this exercise for, isn't to show you guys like lineups to go out there and play. It's more so to show you what you should be thinking about when building lineups. When you take chalk in one spot, it has to change your decision-making process a little bit in some of your other spots. And that's not to say, by the way, that you have to take chalk in lineups. Like if you wanted to go pivot across the board, you could do that too. So if you wanted to go McNeely, let's throw in Sam Stevens, who's going to be relatively low owned. Let's also take a English there at $8,300. If you want to go pivot across the board, I mean, you can do this too. You could take a Mark Hubbard there. You could throw in a Justin Lauer again. You can go pivot for all 6 spots, whatever you desire out there in your lineups. The important aspect is when you start to take those chalky players is when you start to have to think a little bit more. If your player pool, like mine, for the most part is lower owned options, there's going to be 0 to no thought needed when going out there and building lineups. You can mix and match your guys, go out there. You pretty much know your product ownership is going to be low. But if you're building your player pool, if you guys are taking a look at your 25 to maybe 30 players you're taking in your player pool, and you've got a lot of guys that are over 10% down low, or you have a lot of guys towards the top that are like 20, 25% owned, then you're going to have to set some rules in your optimizer if you're using that to go out there and build lineups, or potentially go out there and, force in some, ownership cap, like a product ownership cap. Like I don't know, I'd be hand building. If I had a lot of chalk in my lineups, the reason I hesitate there is like, I probably wouldn't even use an optimizer if I was building with a really chalky player pool. When I build showdown lineups, for example, a lot of times I'll build by hand if I'm building for the chalky game script, just to make sure my lineups are different. Like you can use a product ownership rule that gets the job done for the most part, but that doesn't really help you from the lineup construction standpoint. You can set an ownership cap all you want, but there are low product ownership lineups that are more popular than you'd think because of the way that they're put together. Like it's just a chalky build. It's a chalky lineup construction, which you're not really going to get out of the product ownership build. So that's what I'll say, is that I think the lower owned, the game theory approach is the way to go on a week like this, so that you don't have to galaxy brain all of your lineups. You don't have to sit there and go like, do I have enough differentiation here? Do I have enough leverage in my lineups? if you start off the right way, just already taking those low-owned players. Not to say that you have to. If you want to be a chalk donkey, by all means, I guess do it if you want, but not my favorite way to play. Going out there, galaxy braining lineup construction on every lineup can be a little bit of a mess. You're building 150 lineups. Evening, is it one of those tournaments to leave salary on the table? No. Can you, Sam? Yes, but I don't think you have to force that in. The only incentive to leaving salary on the table is to get different. And really the tournaments where you need to force that in would be Tour Championship, maybe BMW Championship, because there's only 50 players. And then I guess that's about it, really, right? There's limited field events where you have a much harder time getting different. Showdowns that way for NFL. There's only like 20, maybe 25 players that are viable for any given slate. This isn't that, right? We've got over 130 players to choose from. So I think you'd be getting a little bit too cute if you were leaving salary on the table. Could and almost certainly will the optimal lineup leave salary on the table? Yes, right? But you don't need the optimal lineup to take down GPPs. You need the winning lineup to go down there and take GPPs. And in NFL DFS, in NFL Showdown, it's almost always the optimal, but not for this, right? When you have 130 options to choose from, you don't have to be anywhere near perfect to take down a GPP. So I wouldn't leave salary on the table. Just feels like you're getting a little bit too cute. Do I play round one showdown? I do not. And he said, if I am, are AM, PM tee times or 4-2-5-1 splits? I'll look at the weather for you, I guess. But yeah, I don't play round one showdown, just to tell you. It's something that I don't ever do. I've got my main slate lineups in. I usually focus on that for the most part. I think that, every single slate you're doing, you should be putting in the full research process into it. So if you're doing that, right, if you're putting in the full, 2-3 hours, you should be putting into a slate, then yeah, play round one showdown. It's just not something that I do, right, for my process. Never have. Round one, I think it's going to play flat. I mean, the winds are flat the entire day. The temperature is not going to be a big factor early. 65 degrees is just fine. In fact, it's almost perfect weather in terms of just being comfortable out there on the golf course. I don't know. I don't think there's an edge in round one showdown. That's what I'll say about it. It seems like it's going to play flat. So you kind of just play your guys, right? So I know you're talking about 4-2 or 5-1 splits. I don't even think it matters when it comes to tee times. I think if there's going to be an edge tomorrow, it's probably a quarter shot. And I think if anything, the AM would be the way to go. The AM guys going to get slightly softer greens, I would imagine. But the wind is, like I said, it's so flat the entire day that difference is going to be at most, I'd say half a shot. Maybe if in the best case scenario, the AM guys get about a half a shot easier golf course. But I think that's even a stretch. So round one showdown, if I was building lineups, the 4-2, I guess would be shading towards the AM guys. That's probably what I have. I'd probably have a 4-2 if I had to guess. Top 65s make the cut. Yeah, top 65 and ties. Take more afternoon guys to get difference. Yeah, so exactly. Actually, you're right? So if I was playing cash single entry, just to kind of fully think through that with you and Illini, I would be playing 4-2 in cash or single entry because in theory, it's slightly easier. So you shade that direction, right? Here's the thing in large field GPPs. Everyone's going to think that way, right? It's not just me who says that. It's not me, not everyone who just listens to that thinks that same way. Everyone kind of knows that at this point, right? That the morning is usually easier. So I think you're right in that you're going to see a lot of people probably play AM wave players. And I think it's going to be flat, right? If you can tell, I'm just trying to find an edge for you out there in your lineups. And I don't think it's there. I think you're on to that there. I think if you're playing the large field GBP, particularly the big 15 or big 25, whatever they're doing for round one, I might even go 6-0 PM wave. And here, I'll give you a reason why the PM might play easier, okay? I didn't want to say this before because I think it is a low percentage outcome, but it's warmer in the afternoon and it's the same winds, right? So what if the golf course doesn't get firmer as the day goes on, right? In that scenario, it might actually play easier as the day goes on. Now, would that be a low percentage outcome? Yes. But at the same time, I think you're onto something there because if that happens, no one's going to build for that. So maybe more now that I've mentioned it here, but hey, it's a swing season event. People aren't doing all their stuff. More than most, you want the AM PM, but Sam, it could be different, right? People are going to build like that. So I think he's on to something there because he could try and get a little bit of leverage with that kind of lineup. All right, let me bring up my, let's stay. I almost closed the live stream. That was not what I wanted to do. Let me bring up the stat averages here from the Sanderson farm. So this is going to be a little quick section here. Stroke average last year was about 1.5 under par. By the way, if you guys were here for the DFS stuff, go ahead, smash the like button before you guys hop on out of here. And also best luck with all of your exposure. But now we got some prop stuff to go through because round one, I think there's an edge at least over there on Prize Picks. I'm going to talk about why here in a few minutes. So stroke average at this course is normally like 1.5 under par. Birdie average is about 4 birdies per round, and your bogey average is about 2 bogeys per round. The one thing I'll say about this event and all the fall series events is that if you're betting on guys to play well this time of year, that you're going to be in for a huge rude awakening. My first few years of doing golf betting, I'll be the first one to admit this, these fall series events used to hand my ass to me. In fact, my worst weeks ever when it came to prop betting were 2 years ago in all these fall series events. I had been printing. We had a correlation back in the day too. So golf bets were really printing back there in like 2022, 2023, and even more so than now because you could play whoever the hell you wanted to and correlate it to 4 or 5 man slips. That fall, we got murked at all of these events. You want to know why? It's very simple. When you look at it in hindsight, you're like, oh, damn, I should have known this going into it. These guys suck. The guys playing this week suck. It's not Scotty Scheffler. You don't even get fucking Rory McIlroy playing these days. They're over there on the DP World Tour this week, right? You have to know when you're playing props on a week like this that these guys literally blow across the board. They're some of the worst players on tour. You know why they're playing out here in the fall? Because their job's on the line. They don't even have their tour card in most cases out there for next year. So when we look at these averages, right, you may go like, oh, this guy's a better than average player in this kind of field. Is he? Is he that much better than the tour average? So what I'm doing this week, I'm changing it up. I'm betting against players the entire week. And it's not going to be the best players in the field, right? You still got to find the right players to fade. But this time of year, do not fall into the trap of being like, oh, this is an easy golf course. They're all going to go out there and kill it. They're not. I can tell you right now from experience, they're not going to go out there and kill it every single time. So what you're going to get here in Prize Picks and why I think there's an edge this week is that they have the correlation turned off for 3-man slips. So let me actually stop sharing so I can bring up Prize Picks. If I bring it up too early, they block me from looking at the site. I think it's if you AFK on the site, they don't like that. Probably because it uses up some of their resources. So they've stopped people from doing that. But yeah, we've got it up right here. And what you'll see with these 3-man slips is that if you take the right 3 props, if you take, I believe it's one of these green props and one of these fairway props, and then you can mix it with whatever fades you want for like strokes and birdies, it's going to give you the full payout out there on a slip. So we're back to the correlation days. And because of this field just being absolute horseshit, these guys all being dog shit that are all playing this week, it's going to be a whole lot of fades that we're playing. So over here in Underdog, they have a very similar board. The issue is the payouts are dog shit. So you're going to see with the slip that we take here, the kind of props I'm trying to play. If you played them over here in Underdog, you'd get like a much, much lower payout. So round one, I have no exposure in on Underdog. And until we see the actual averages tomorrow morning, that's not going to change. Based on the boards that we have now, all of the value is here on Prize Picks. And I'll show you guys a few examples. So let's see. Any questions before we really dive on in? Good points. Thank you. Of course. Yeah. And you said, have a good week with all my stuff. Appreciate that, man. Hopefully we can take down a GPP as a community. It'd be pretty sweet. What's going on, Anointed? CT Pan can be trusty, won't withdraw. Absolutely not. He's one of those guys like Hideki who withdraws on a whim's notice. And what type of disadvantage would drivers less than 290 yards get? So we've had some shorter hitters find success here in Wingted, but one of the highest correlated stats to success is driving distance. So it's hard to quantify the exact type of disadvantage that they're getting, but there is some sort of disadvantage there. So I think you're right with that kind of assessment. But the CT Pan thing, to circle back on that, could he withdraw? Absolutely. Should you worry about it? Probably not. If you're worrying about a withdrawal, then you're playing the wrong way. You more so want to be looking for the upside in players, whether they can get there, which at least for me in large field GPPs, I'll take on some withdrawal risk from time to time. So can he withdraw? Yes. Can you trust him not to? Absolutely not. But should you worry about it? Probably not either. Let's see. How low is too low to play based on salary? So lowest I went was 6,400, Sam. And it's only one player. I think above that, it was like $6,600. I went for my cheapest player. So I think you could go the whole way down the board if you wanted to, but it's not necessary. Pricing is very soft, especially with me avoiding a lot of the top end of the board. Just not something that I prioritized. Let's get back to this props here, though. So over here on the fairway side, we could go with a green prop too. I've got a bunch I've already entered. 3 or 4 slips over there on the Patreon page already. Let me find my favorite ones to go with here, though. So we're going to go this under on Matt Kuchar greens regulation. We're going to go under on Patrick Rogers. Actually, I'm going to try and make it stuff I guess you already know that's a prop now, so I guess I can't take it out. Let's go the Kuchar under. Let's go this Patrick Rogers under. And then for strokes, this Adam Svensson over on strokes. So here's the edge, okay? And it's just payout based. This would normally pay 4.25x. It pays 5x out here for round number 1. Doesn't seem like a massive difference, but it is when you have 3 correlated props. And just as I said before, we have a whole lot of slappies in this field. If we circle back to those averages, I'll just bring them up for you real quickly. You'll see that all these players are projected well better than the average. And what you'll see in every single case is that they should not be projected well better than the field average. So for example, fairway average is 7.41 per round. A little bit of a dyslexic moment there, I suppose. But yeah, 7.41 per round, not 4.7 per round. Patrick Rogers is outside the top 130 on tour when it comes to your fairway hit percentage. So he projects worse than the field average for sure in this kind of field. And the field average was lower than 7.5. So that's a no-brainer kind of play. Matt Kuchar, he ranks outside the top 140 on tour when it comes to hitting greens regulation. He was at 13.5 for a projection. The average here is only 12.74. So if he's worse than the average player, well, that's pretty easy under to go out there and find. And then what was the other one we took? That's right. It was the Adam Svensson over on strokes. So you see here, right? Stroke average was only 1.57 under par. Svensson ball striking heading into this event, he's lost in two straight events. He's been carrying himself out there with the short game, which historically he's not a very good short game player. And he'd have to get to -4 to go under this sort of line. So that would be a 68, that sort of line. That's a 2.5 strokes gain to the field, which is something that Adam Svensson does less than 25% of rounds. So I would say with the ball striking stats being a little bit sketchy, that's really why I like the over on Svensson. He has that push equity there at 69 strokes. But in this kind of field, you know, I feel like a lot of people will say like, oh, it might play like -2. So if it's going to play like, and that would be a best case scenario, by the way, if it played to like a -2 scoring average, they'll look at these guys at 69.5 and they'll go, all these guys have to do is shoot one better than the average, right? And they shoot 69. And that's how they talk themselves into taking all these unders. And I'll say it right now, a couple years ago, that's how I talked myself in to some of the unders on some of those players. These guys are hardly better than the average, if at all better than the average in this kind of field. Like, sure, it's a shitty field, but these are all shitty players at the same time. So, you know, there are even guys here like Eric Cole that I really like this week, for example. Like, I bet him. He's one of my 3 outright bets that I took. I can't even take him for an under at 69.5 because even I know that like he's far from a lock to go under that kind of line. Like that'd be better than an average round. And these are the kind of players, right? Again, there's a reason why they're playing this fall. That don't do that very consistently. So that's what I'll say about the props. I think that you can go after some fades. And really, the main idea behind that is the payouts are much better than they should be. In fact, this morning, if you went with 4 fades, so let me see, I think it was something like this that I did. This actually paid 10x this morning if you went with this kind of combination. In fact, it still does. Huh? Okay, so here's the confusing part, guys. I've been trying to build these 10x slips the entire afternoon after they quote unquote fixed it and it didn't work. I have a feeling that Zach Johnson, because he's the last one that I put in here, is broken. In fact, let's test this. Look at this, guys. I figured it out. So Zach Johnson, I don't know for whatever reason, the payout's different if you take the under on him. So look at this. This is an under in Mav McNeely, right? It's an under 13.5. It's 8.5x right there. You go down here. Let's take him out. Let's go down and take the Zach Johnson prop instead. You use Zach Johnson here, and it pays 10x. So no idea what's going on there. Something with their coding is clearly off over there on Prize Picks. So yeah, we'll go with this for the slip then. We'll do a 10x 4-man slip. Fuck it. I believe the slip I took was a little bit different than the one that we had here. In fact, let me see the exact combination that I had. One second, guys. Get a sip of water while I'm double checking what that 4-man was. I have like 3 or 4 slips in, so it's hard to remember them off the top of my head. It was Johnson under, it was Rogers under like we had, Kuchar under, and then it was a Woodland under on birdies. So if you want to tell exactly what I took, you could take this Svensson out and then take this under on Woodland birdies. But however you guys want to dice that up, that's how I would approach this kind of thing. And yeah, I don't know what's going on with the Zach Johnson. You can see this still pays 10x. This is the exact slip that I took before. For whatever reason, you play this under on Zach Johnson greens, and you get a better payout than you should on a 4-man slip. And I guess what I'll say about the Zach Johnson prop here, the reason I like him for an under is this is a relatively long course. I don't think a lot of people really say that about Sanderson Farms, about Jackson Country Club, but it is. It's got a bunch of long par threes. In fact, I'm just going to show you guys. I mean, if we go hole by hole, you'll see why I like the under on Zach Johnson. He, of course, right, a really short player off the tee. And when you see some of these par threes, you're going to be like, oh, wow, yeah, I could see him easily missing a bunch of greens. So where are we at? All right, so here we go. So over on the PGA slate, first par 3, 181. Okay, it's not so bad. 212, it's a pretty beefy par 3. 227, that's a pretty beefy par 3. 168, so that's one of the shorter par 3s out here. Last hole is a 500-yard par 4. 16 is a 480-yard par 4. You got some shorter holes, right? Like 330, like most players are going to hit a green regulation there. But then you've got these longer, beefier holes mixed in, like 6, for example, is a 480-yard par 4. Hole 2's, I guess 1 and 2, right? Some of the easier green regulations. A player like Zach Johnson is going to have trouble on those longer holes. So that's why I like the under on that kind of prop and what you can do for props. So that's all I've got out here for the live stream, though, guys. Going to go ahead and touch on any last-second questions if anyone has them. But for all of my exposure for all of these tournaments, whether it's for props or over there on the DFS side, make sure to check out the Patreon page in the link in the description of the video. On there, it's $15 a month. It can get you access to all of the spreadsheets that you saw over there for DFS. That includes the main slate sheet that we use throughout the live stream here, as well as what we're doing for Showdown and rounds 2 through 4. So rounds 2 through 4 Showdown, I have projections for that. I update it with current score, ownership out there for every single round, and of course my player pool and exposure there too. So if you're wanting to join that, join the DFS tier over there on the Patreon page. And then for all the prop stuff that I'm doing, I also post all my exposure for Underdog and Prize Picks over there on the prop tier. So it's the same price, $15 a month. I give you access to all the slips that I'm taking. And for round 1 so far, it was those 3 correlated fade slips that I'm taking over here on Prize Picks. I just think that's where the value is right now. Tomorrow morning, though, I will be paying especially close attention to some of the scoring averages to see if we can find some value, because, you know, maybe we can add some stuff over here on Underdog if we can find a few props that make sense. Maybe the course is playing even harder than expected, right? We want to add in even more fades, or maybe it's playing a little bit easier than expected and we could find some value on either site. So if you want all of that, if you want all of the live up-to-date exposure that I'm getting to, make sure to check out the Patreon for that. But that's all I've got. Let me check on any questions, and if not, we're going to hop on out of here. See, looks like we're good. So, alrighty, guys, that's all I've got for the live stream. Appreciate everyone stopping by as usual. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content to come. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have our Thursday night football preview dropping. So if you're here for the football stuff, we'll have that dropping tomorrow for you. And of course, for all the showdown stuff throughout the weekend, rounds 2 through 4, we'll be doing live streams for Friday through Sunday. So for all of that, make sure to stop on by for those live streams. Starting times will be posted over there on my Twitter/X. So make sure to follow me there if you haven't already as well for all the latest up-to-date info on the streams. And that's all I've got, guys. A lot of talking. Now we got to go out there and build some lineups, and best of luck with all of your exposure.